Hello and welcome to this month's painting tutorial. We're going to focus on a watercolor landscape that involves a couple of people today. Here's a reference material that we're working from. So I started by drawing the horizon line. That's going to be right here. And it's a little bit too close to the center for comfort. So in my piece I shifted it down just a little bit. Then I've already drawn the figures and protected them with masking fluid to save some time in the tutorial. And since you always paint back to front, the first thing that we're going to do is to paint the sky behind the trees. But what I'm going to focus on in this tutorial is not only painting the landscape itself, but showing you how to adapt the colors. Right now they're extremely drab. And so what we're going to do is add some nice fall colors and really liven this up, help it to pop some more. So let's start by painting that sky. There are two ways to go about wetting your paper. You can either spray with a squirt bottle, or you can dip a brush. I like to use a big flat in nice clean water and brush the water smoothly over the surface. Then I'm going to mix up a cerulean and a bit of cobalt. It's a nice friendly sky color. So then I'm just going to use that same large flat, brush it back and forth, and if I get some streaky areas, I'm not going to worry about that too much. For one thing, when it dries, those are going to even out. For another thing, the sky is often streaky. I'm going to paint well down below the horizon line just so that I'm sure I got all of the sky covered, and then I'm going to let that dry. I'm going to resist the temptation to do anything more with it at this point. Okay, the sky is dry now, so what I'm going to do next is do some of this work in the middle ground and foreground. So I want to paint the biggest shapes of color first, and I'm also going to establish a couple of these small shapes like this tree in the very background, just so I don't forget that it's there. So I'll get a big flat out, and then I'm just going to quickly choose a nice green here and blot that tree in before I go too much farther. Okay, then I'm going to get that flat ready, and I'm going to paint some more green here to be grass in the background, and not very vibrant green, but I don't want it to be completely dead. Then they're walking on a dirt road, so I'm just going to sort of outline the shape for myself and keep it wet so that those lines don't get too distinct. It's looking pretty dead still, so I'm going to go in there with some more greens. Let your colors mix on the page. You don't paint one flat color. No, that is boring. To make your work a lot more interesting, you're going to put down multiple colors and let them mix right on the page. And a good rule of thumb is three colors. Then I'm going to have some grasses, which are yellow. They're growing up in the foreground here. But again, I'm not painting individual grasses at this point. I'm just painting base tone. Now I'm going to let it dry. Here's what the painting looks like after this initial coat has dried. I'm going to proceed now to the trees, which will help make the picture make a little bit more sense. When you're painting trees, I think that it's natural to reach for a round brush, but I really recommend sticking with the flats as long as you possibly can. So let me just start to drop in some of these branches here. Now there are going to be some branches that are behind and some that are coming forward towards the viewer. So you can't let all of your branches be the same color. Some of them need to be dark, some are going to be light, some small, some larger. Make sure that you give it plenty of variation or your tree won't look realistic. And since I want to sprinkle some foliage over these, I'm not going to paint everything. I'm going to leave some branches half done, and I'm going to save some for painting after that foliage put in. And then also, while the paint is wet, I'm going to drop in some different colors. Here's some yellow ochre. Remember, you want to put in colors that can mix on the page to give your paintings a little bit more lift, interest, variety. But I do want to add a few more trees that come up on this side. So let me do that. Here's a tree, here's a tree, everywhere a tree. I use an upward slash motion like this, just letting the corner of the brush touch, and I can get some of those really fine, intricate branch shapes. Like here, zip. I'm going to do the same thing here, by the way, and wash out some of these edges so that they disappear into that foliage. Alright, I'm going to go off camera and finish up these trees. It's just going to be the bare branches though, and then we'll come back and sprinkle in that foliage. After adding some tree branches, we're ready to sprinkle in some foliage colors. So when you start to sprinkle in colors, it's a really chaotic process, and the first step is always going to be to protect your paper. I like to do my splattering with either a toothbrush or a nylon brush like this that I can flick, or a round brush that I can tap like this. I'll just mix up some yellows here, and I'll start to sprinkle them in. But just take some time and get some serious paint on the page. You want a lot of color and you want some variation in colors. Also, after you've done some, spritz over it with water, and that will also give you some different textures. So some of these will be really hard edges like leaves in the foreground. The softer ones where you sprayed the water will retreat to the background. But now I'm going to take off my protective papers. See, here and there now I'm going to go and dab some color in with my brush so I have a little bit more control. Okay. Then in the foreground there are some definite shadow shapes that I want to get in on the trail, and I'm also going to want to add some of these same colors on the ground here too. So I'm going to use a large round and just kind of dry brush in some of those fall leaf colors. Spray it down, keep it wet, and after this dries I can add some more detailed leaf shapes to the foreground, and then that will help this in the background to read as leaves. Alright, so this is a good place to stop and let it dry. When we come back I'm going to add some more shadows in the foreground and some branches. After some foliage has been dropped in and the background's in a better place, then you can start adding some foreground and middle ground details. So I've already started by adding some of these shadows, but they're a little bit clunky. So I'm going to go back now and soften them up some. So I'm going to put my reference material really close to my board, get a round brush, and I'm just dampening up that paint that I've already put down, so I'll have a little bit more variation. And then I'll go back in with some new fresh paint and add a different color on top too. Okay, so let's leave that for a bit, and I'll show you how to add some grasses in the foreground. For the dark ones, I'll get some dark paint on my rigger brush, and then I'll hold my rigger brush by the back of the handle, let it point straight down, and then just fling, 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 fling up some little lines like this. The key is to have enough paint and to have the right amount of control. Similar work can be done in the trees themselves to add some additional branches. So I have hold of my rigger in the same way, and I'm just adding some side strokes and making cross lines that will read as branches. I also need a little trunk, zip, and a little shadow for this tree, and some shadow for the grass up here to show that this is a hill. There's a gentle wash of some additional color on that road, and I need to clarify these branches quite a bit, so I'll do that the same way with that rigger stroke. Now if I want to bring out a trunk that's lighter than the rest, I have to get a flat brush, wet, and I pinch off the excess water with my fingers so it's a really sharp blade. And then I'm going to just scrape down. Then after I wash, I'm going to blot. Blot, blot. And then if I wanted to stand out even more, I can darken either side of that line with some dark paint. I'm going to do that here and there as well, because some of the trees are light and standing forward, and some of them are dark and standing back, and on this side as well. Another thing I want to do is remove my masking fluid from the figures, and I like to do this as soon as I'm done with the surrounding color. So then I'm going to use a round brush, and I'll just add some details. And I think I'm going to have her in a bright blue shirt. Get that down as one solid shape. I think I'll put the little girl in a pink dress. Then of course she needs some hair. There's some hair for you, and some hair for Mom. All I did was add the shadow color, and then with a damp brush, while that's still wet, I'll flood it over to fill in the rest of the shape. So let me go off camera now and add a little bit of these details that we worked on camera, and I'll come back to it and show you how far I got. After adding some more detail in the foliage, some darker leaves here to accent the leaves that are coming forward, I'm down to the brass tacks. So I just need to remove some masking fluid here in the foreground where I protected some grasses. And I think that after this is done, the picture will be finished. And see how those masked lines really pop those grasses forward. Now just a bit more realism. You want some interesting edges. Those draw the eye. So in this particular picture, of course, you have this area of contrast, high contrast here, and the figures that draw the eye first. But then there's plenty to pull the eye down to the bottom edges with these white grasses, and then these two white trees that are so contrasty against the dark trees. So now I'm just going to remove my tape. Now let me pan up so you can see the top, and then pan down. And here's the original photo reference material that we started with. So you can see that those fall colors really add a lot of liveliness and color that spark more interest. So at this point there remains nothing left but to take it off the board and to sign it. Before doing those two things though, I always recommend putting the painting away and then bringing it back out so you can see it with fresh eyes. And that will really help you to catch any mistakes. They'll just jump out at you. But since that's all that remains to be done on this picture, this concludes this month's painting tutorial. I thank you so much for watching.